Plumbing Solutions educational series. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about the air compressor. Now, in residential new construction plumbing, we don't really use a whole lot of pneumatics or air-powered tools, but we do carry compressors on our truck because we have to pressurize our water lines at our rough-in stage so that we can pass inspection and move along with construction. Now, every time I do a tool, a fixture, something like this, I like to get into a little bit of the history behind it. Now, compressed air goes back thousands and thousands and thousands of years to where early man was just figuring out how to harness fire. And somebody at one point went and blew on that fire and saw it flare up. And they also learned very quickly that when that fire started to die, they could add a little extra fuel to it and blow on it and it would come back to life. So the first use of compressed air was the human lungs. Now, if we fast forward a couple thousand years, we get into the Bronze Age and humanity's starting to mess around with smelting metals down to make weapons or pots or whatever. And they start creating these little furnaces in the ground, and they come up with the blow tube. And essentially it started off as just some hollow plant-based tree, like a reed or something, that was naturally hollow, and they could build their little fire pit, put their ore on top of it, shove that in the side of it, and take turns blowing on it. Well, if we jump forward a couple more thousand years, we see the invention of the bellows. Now, the bellows was basically a leather bag with some little flap valves on it, and you squeezed it and it would concentrate that air onto that fire. These things got bigger and bigger. Some of them were controlled by your feet, and then they started using water wheels to pump these massive bellows. The bigger the bellows, the hotter the fire, and now we're moving into those heavy metals like iron and then eventually steel. So from there we move into about the 1700s, and there was kind of a little battle between compressed air and steam. Well, steam works great for train engines and things like that, but if you're trying to pump steam over a long length, it's going to cool off. And what it does when it cools off is it condenses back into water and all your pressure's gone. Well, with compressed air, once it's pressurized, it's going to stay pressurized and pretty much go as far as you want it to. So from that point, compressed air wins because of a lot of other factors too. Early 1900s, 20th century, America goes to war, a couple big ones there. And we used compressed air to make those planes, those tanks, those trucks, all kinds of stuff. We also see it being used in like the Empire State Building. As our buildings get bigger, our ships get bigger, compressed air played a big, big role in that. Which brings us to more of our modern times. Okay, let's talk a little bit about safety when dealing with compressed air. A lot of people don't really think about it, and I remember being a little kid taking these little blowers and putting them in your mouth and making all kinds of weird faces or blowing it on your hand and stuff like that. Well, compressed air can be just as deadly as pressurized water. You don't really think about it like that, but this could cut you. And it could break your skin, and those air bubbles enter your bloodstream, and it could kill you. So don't ever spray these things on you. I always remember one of my auto body teachers back in high school, after class every day, he'd plug one of these little things into the air hoses and blow his clothes off and stuff. You're asking for trouble. I know people have done it for years and years, but be careful around compressed air. Don't stick it up your nose or in your ears or do those little wavy lines on your hand, because you could hurt yourself really bad really quickly. Just remember that. Always inspect your equipment before and after you use it. Look at your air hose. Make sure it's not got any big blisters or bubbles or anything on it like that that could pop and end up hurting somebody. Hold on to your air lines when you unchuck these things, because that still has pressure on it and it can flop around, pop you in the face, all kinds of stuff. Also, whenever around compressed air, I recommend you wear your safety glasses. Some job sites are going to require it, so just get used to these guys. All right, let's talk a little bit about how to use an air compressor. First things first, these things are electric. You plug them into a drop cord, and that's about it. And then there's an on-off switch up here. But before you get going there, these things are equipped with a tank drain. It's a little valve down here, and that can be screwed out to let the air off of it. Now, when you use these things a whole lot, I always recommend open that thing up, drain all the little water out of it, and don't let this thing get completely full of water, because it's going to start spitting water at you. And if you are using tools, tools don't like that water. So check that. The next thing would be to turn it on. Now, this is going to be loud, and I'm not going to let it run too much. But that's it. It's not a whole lot to it. The next thing you need to know about is these two gauges here on the front. One of them is your tank pressure, and that's going to show you how much pressure is actually in the tank. The other one is your regulated pressure, and it has a knob here on the front which you can turn up and down to control that amount of regulated pressure. Now, this isn't something we're going to use a whole lot. We're pretty much going to crank this thing wide open and just leave it there. Now, if I was hooking some other tool, like say an airbrush or something that runs off of really low pressure, I would be using this. Now, it does come with two hookups here. One of them is non-regulated and one of them is regulated. This is not necessarily so you can run two air hoses at the same time. One of them is regulated and one of them is non-regulated. Now, if you've never used an air compressor before, these little couplings have a slip collar on them, and your end of your hose or whatever would fit into the end of that. Pull it back, push it till it clicks. We got that little bit of air that we built up from when I did turn it on, and then it's going to stay there until you pop that loose. And that right there is how you pop it loose. Don't just pull this and shoot that across the room, because this, if there's 150, 200 psi on this thing, it's going to flop around and you could hurt somebody. Now, what do we use compressed air for? I said earlier that we use it to test our water lines at our rough-in stage, and that's pretty much it. Well, we have these new little things, we call them a wash machine box. It's set up to where there's a hole here for a drain pipe to go in. Of course, this anchors into the wall, and it's got these two little hose ports. Well, it works out really well. You've got a gauge. You can take your little gauge, screw it into one side, flip it over where you can read it, and then we make up these little things. And it's pretty much a hose thread piece with a couple other threaded pieces that gives you the air chuck ability to where you can hook this guy into here. And then we screw that in to the other side over here and let our compressor build up, and then we can open these valves and let that pressure build. So let's go on up in the training center here and pick out a good wash machine box and show you how you pressurize the system. All right, here we are at our laundry box. I've got my gauge hooked on one side. I've got my adapter hooked onto the other. My valves are off. And excuse me if I knock the camera around, because this air hose is giving me a little bit of problems here. But you're gonna push that on. God. Whew. That one's been in the sand and dirt. Gotta keep them things clean. All right. We're gonna turn our gauge on first. See, we have 0 psi. I've already let my compressor run for a little bit, so it's charged up, so it's not making a bunch of noise while we do this. And then we just open our valve. And there it goes. Yep, right there's about where we want it. The inspectors asked for 100. I like to see 120 because 120 is where our relief valves blow off on our water heaters to protect our system. So if you know you can test up to 120, your plumbing system's going to be safe, because anything above that, the relief line on the water heater is going to open and start dumping water to let that pressure off. But that's basically it. Once you're there, turn your valves back off. I recommend turning this one off too, because a lot of times these gauges like to leak down, and if your leak is in the gauge, it's going to leak the whole plumbing system down and you're going to fail your inspection. The inspector knows to come turn that back on to see if that needle jumps. But that's pretty much it. Well, there you go. That concludes our episode on air compressors. I hope you learned a lot. I hope I didn't move too fast for you. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you watch some more of them. Thank you.